My parents left me in foster care at the age of 12 to travel with my sister. Now they're unemployed, desperate, and trying to contact me, so I gave them what they deserved. My name is Adam, and I'm now 24 years old. But this story begins years ago, when I was just 12. Back then, I thought my family was pretty normal, at least, what I believed to be normal. We weren't rich, but we had a decent house, decent clothes, and life seemed okay. My parents, Laura and Greg, didn't act like anything was wrong, until it was. Then there was my sister, Emma. Emma was the favorite child. You know the type, the one teachers adored, the one parents couldn't stop bragging about. If she so much as sneezed, it was treated like a masterpiece. I was just Adam. It's not like I was a bad kid or anything, but no matter what I did, it was as if I were background noise. Emma had space on the fridge for her drawings. I got a pat on the back and a, "That's fine, Adam." The thing is, I didn't hate Emma for this. It wasn't her fault that they treated her like a trophy and me like I didn't matter. But it definitely made me feel like I wasn't important. Anyway, the day everything fell apart started off pretty normal. I was in my room playing with some action figures I wasn't quite ready to give up yet. Then Laura called me downstairs, using that weird tone parents use when they're trying to sound calm, but you know something's up. I figured maybe I had left the milk out or forgotten to do some chore. But when I walked into the living room, Greg and Laura were sitting on the couch looking way too serious for it to be about milk. "Sit down, Adam," Greg said, pointing to the chair in front of them. His tone was sharp, like this was a business meeting and not a family conversation. Laura, on the other hand, was doing her best to look understanding, but something about it felt off. I sat down, confused. Laura took a deep breath and said, "Adam, we need to talk about something important." My first thought was that someone had died, maybe a grandparent I barely knew. But then Greg said, "We've had some financial difficulties, and we can no longer take care of you." At first, I thought I had misheard. "What do you mean you can't take care of me? Am I some kind of subscription you're canceling?" I just stared at them, trying to process what he had said. But Laura went on. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. This is something we've been struggling with for a while, and we had to make a very difficult decision." A difficult decision, right? They made it sound like they were choosing between cable packages, not deciding whether or not to abandon their child. I asked them what they meant, still hoping this wasn't what it sounded like. Laura explained that they had found a foster home for me, and that it would be only temporary. She kept repeating that word, temporary, like it was supposed to make me feel better. "Why can't Emma go to the foster home?" I blurted out, desperate to understand. Laura's face went cold for a second before she said, "Emma is in school, Adam. She needs stability." Stability, like I didn't need it. Greg jumped in before I could say anything else. "This isn't about choosing one of you over the other. It's about what makes the most sense right now." I started crying, and not the quiet kind. It was ugly, full-body sobbing because how else does a 12-year-old react when his parents tell him they're giving up on him? Laura tried to hug me, but I pushed her away. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, over and over. But all they did was repeat the same rehearsed lines about difficult decisions and financial hardship. The next day, they packed a small bag for me and drove me to the foster home. The ride there was silent, not the kind of silence where people are lost in thought, but the kind where you can feel the tension in every breath. I kept looking at them, waiting for one of them to turn to me and say, "This is a mistake. You're coming home." But they didn't. When we got to the house, I stayed in the car for a moment, hoping they'd change their minds. Greg turned around and said, "Come on, Adam. Let's get this over with." Like it was some chore he just wanted to cross off his to-do list. I got out of the car, clutching the duffel bag they had packed for me. The foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, were standing at the door. They seemed quite kind, but I barely noticed them. All I could focus on was the fact that my parents, were about to leave me there. Laura knelt in front of me and said, "We love you, Adam. This isn't goodbye forever. Just give it some time, okay?" She kissed me on the forehead, but it didn't feel comforting. It felt like someone was stamping a returned label on me. Greg shook my hand. Not a hug, a handshake. Like I was some distant cousin he barely knew. And then they left. I stood on the porch watching their car disappear down the street, my chest growing heavier with every second. I kept thinking, they'll come back. They have to come back. But they didn't. That night, I kept replaying the day in my head. What did I do wrong? Was I not good enough? Why Emma and not me? Those questions haunted me for weeks, and the worst part was that I had no answers. All I had was their promise that this was temporary. And while I wanted to believe it, deep down I had this corroding feeling that I would never see them again. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything changed. It wasn't just about them leaving, it was about how they left. Like I was a burden they were glad to be rid of. But at 12 years old, I didn't have the words to process that. All I knew was that my parents were gone, and I was alone. In the days that followed, the Millers tried to make me feel at home. Mrs. Miller made pancakes for breakfast every morning. Mr. Miller would poke his head into my room now and then with random fun facts. Despite their efforts, I wasn't ready to trust them, or anyone, really. My parents had promised this was temporary, so I clung to that promise like a life raft. I kept telling myself they would call, that they would explain everything, and I'd be back home before I even knew it. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, and not a single word from them. It wasn't until I started school again that the reality of my situation began to settle in. The other kids at school noticed I was new and asked me all kinds of questions. Where are you from? Why did you move here? I didn't have the energy to explain the truth, so I made up vague answers like, oh, my parents are working in another state. Even saying those words left a bitter taste in my mouth. One afternoon after school, I was sitting in the Miller's living room, scrolling through my phone and avoiding homework. That's when I made the mistake of searching for my parents online. I didn't even know what I was looking for, maybe just some kind of sign that they were still thinking about me. What I found instead took my breath away. There they were, smiling on a beach, the ocean behind them, looking happier than I had ever seen them. The caption below the photo read, "Finally living our dream life." My stomach turned as I scrolled through their posts, photo after photo of tropical vacations, fancy dinners, and of course, Emma. She was in almost every picture, usually right in the center with captions like "our amazing daughter." It was like I didn't even exist. The more I scrolled, the angrier I became. They had told me they couldn't afford to keep me, but there they were, living like influencers. And Emma? She wasn't in foster care like I was. She was still with them, smiling for the camera like everything was perfect. It felt like my head was spinning. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had erased me. What hit me the hardest wasn't just the photos. It was the travel blog. Yes, they had an entire blog where they detailed their journey to freedom. They wrote about how letting go of material possessions, meaning me, had brought them clarity. I scrolled down to the comments. But this time, something stood out. There was a comment from an account with no profile picture. It read, "Must be nice to escape and leave everything behind. Hope it doesn't catch up with you." The words felt sharp, like they were meant to cut through any shiny image Greg and Laura were trying to project. My mind was racing. What did the commenter mean by "leave everything behind"? Were they talking about me, or something else entirely? I clicked on the comment, but the account was private, and its profile picture was just a blank gray circle. I scrolled further down the page, looking for more. In another photo, one of Laura holding a tropical drink, someone else had written, "Looks like leaving the city was worth it after all." My chest tightened as I stared at the words, "leaving the city." Why would someone say that? I kept scrolling through the comments, but nothing else stood out as strongly as those two. Most people were congratulating them, saying how inspiring their lifestyle was. I wanted to scream at those people for not seeing through the facade. I couldn't let it go. Were those just random troll comments, or did they know something I didn't? It's not like Greg and Laura were strangers to lying. They told me they couldn't take care of me, but clearly, that wasn't true. There was more to this. Questions swirled in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about them. But what could I do? I had no access to their past or their secrets. All I could do was stew over those sharp words and wonder what else they were hiding. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. It wasn't just the lies they had told me, it was the fact that they didn't even feel guilty. They were out there, living their best lives, and I was here, trying to figure out how to exist without them. That night at dinner, the Millers noticed something was wrong. I wasn't exactly subtle about my mood. "Are you okay, Adam?" Mr. Miller asked, setting down his fork. "Yeah," I mumbled, not wanting to get into it. But Mrs. Miller wasn't the type to let things go. "You don't have to tell us if you're not ready," she said gently, "but if something's bothering you, we're here." I looked at them, these people who barely knew me, but somehow seemed to care more than my own parents ever had. And for some reason, I broke. I told them everything. The blog. The photos. The captions. I expected them to tell me to stop looking or that it didn't matter. But they didn't. Mrs. Miller just listened, her eyes full of that quiet sympathy I was still getting used to. Mr. Miller, on the other hand, looked angry. "You have every right to be mad," he said, leaning forward. "What they did to you, that's not on you. That's on them. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." It wasn't some grand speech or anything, but it hit me hard. For the first time, someone was acknowledging that what had happened wasn't my fault. Over the following weeks, I started adjusting more to life with the Millers. They weren't perfect, but they were consistent. They asked about my day. Helped with homework. Encouraged me to try new things. I even started opening up more at school, joining a few clubs and making friends. But the anger I felt toward my parents didn't go away. If anything, it grew. But I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let their decision define me. So I started joining clubs at school, not because I suddenly wanted to be the most social kid on the planet, but because I needed to stay busy. I signed up for the debate team first. I figured I was already used to arguing, thanks, Greg and Laura, so why not use that? Turns out, I was pretty good at it. Then I got a part-time job. Mr. Miller had been hinting for weeks that I might enjoy having some spending money, so I gave in and applied at a local bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved being surrounded by books, and people who actually wanted to talk about them. Plus, it gave me a small taste of independence. Every paycheck felt like a step toward building a future that was mine, and only mine. At some point, I met Ryan. Ryan treated me like a regular kid, not a charity case. When I told him about my parents, he just nodded and said, "That's messed up, dude. Wanna play video games later?" I came home from school one day and found the house unusually quiet. Normally, Mrs. Miller would be in the kitchen, humming along to some oldies playlist while Mr. Miller tinkered with something in the garage. But this time, I heard hushed voices coming from the dining room. I stopped in the hallway, just out of sight, straining to listen. "We should tell him," it was Mrs. Miller's voice, low and uncertain. "He has a right to know," Mr. Miller replied. "If it's about him, we can't keep it a secret. It'll only hurt him more. He's doing so well now," she argued. "At least let's wait until we know more. That letter doesn't explain much. It might be nothing." I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. A letter about me? Before I could figure out how to ask without making it obvious I had been eavesdropping, Mr. Miller sighed. "Fine. We'll wait. But if they contact us again, we have to be honest." I heard footsteps heading toward the living room and quickly slipped into the kitchen, pretending I had just come in. Mrs. Miller smiled when she saw me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I slipped into the dining room. I knew I shouldn't snoop, but I couldn't help it. On the table was a stack of mail, and near the bottom, I saw an envelope with my name on it. I hesitated before picking it up. The return address was from a law firm. My stomach churned as I opened it, scanning the first few lines. "To whom it may concern, this is a notification regarding unresolved debts associated with Gregory and Laura. As designated guardians of Adam, we request any relevant documentation concerning the family's financial situation during." I stopped reading, my hand trembling. Debts. That's what Greg and Laura had been running from. They hadn't left me because they couldn't afford to keep me, they left because they couldn't face their own mistakes. I slid the letter back into the envelope and returned it to the pile, trying to make it look untouched. My mind was racing. I didn't know what to do with this information, but one thing was certain, Greg and Laura had been lying about more than just financial struggles. By the time I turned 16, things were starting to fall into place. I had been working hard in school, balancing my job and extracurricular activities, and it was paying off. My grades were solid, and my debate coach told me I had a real shot at a scholarship. That was the first time I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't involve my parents or their baggage. It felt good, even liberating. Then the scholarship became a reality. I still remember the day I got the letter. I had applied on a whim, thinking there was no way I'd actually get it. When I opened the envelope and saw the words full scholarship, I couldn't believe it. I ran downstairs to show the Millers, who practically lit up with pride. Mrs. Miller hugged me so tightly, and Mr. Miller kept saying, "I knew it. I knew you could do it." That night, I decided to share the news on social media. I wasn't one to post personal stuff, but this felt like a moment worth celebrating. I wrote something short and sweet about how hard work pays off and how grateful I was for the support I'd received. The comments started rolling in almost immediately, classmates, teachers, even random peers I barely knew. But there was one comment that made my stomach drop. It was from Laura. "We're so proud of you, Adam. Let's reconnect soon." Proud of me? After everything? I stared at the comment for what felt like an eternity, my anger bubbling back to the surface. It wasn't just that they had commented, it was how casual it was. Like we were distant relatives who had simply lost touch, not parents who had completely abandoned their child. I didn't reply. What could I have possibly said? Instead, I deleted the comment and blocked them both. That was the moment I realized I didn't need their approval, or their guilt trips. The scholarship gave me a new sense of purpose. I threw myself even harder into my studies, determined to prove to myself, and maybe a little to them, that I could succeed without their help. Mr. Miller started giving me mini lessons on financial literacy, which I actually found fascinating. He showed me how to save, budget, and think about long-term goals. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical. And it gave me a sense of control I had never had before. With his encouragement, I also started tutoring younger students after school. It wasn't something I ever pictured myself doing, but it turned out I had a knack for explaining things in a way that made sense. Plus, it felt good, helping kids who were struggling, especially because I knew what it felt like to be left behind. One day, during one of our tutoring sessions, Ryan asked me what my end goal was. "So, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" he said, leaning back in his chair like it was the most casual question in the world. I thought about it for a second before answering. I just want to be stable, you know. Have my own place, my own life, and not feel like I'm depending on anyone else. "That's solid," Ryan said with a smile. "But don't forget to have fun along the way." Ryan's words stuck with me. I realized I had been so focused on proving myself that I hadn't left much room for anything else. So I made myself a promise, to find balance. I kept working hard, but I also started saying yes to things I would normally avoid, game nights with friends, spontaneous road trips, even just hanging out at the park on a lazy Sunday. It wasn't much, but it reminded me that life didn't have to be all effort and no joy. By the end of that year, I felt like a completely different person. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The Millers had become my rock. Ryan felt like a brother. And for the first time, I felt like I was on a path that was entirely my own. The absence of my parents still hurt sometimes, but it didn't define me. If anything, it pushed me forward. Then things took a different turn when graduation day arrived. It was supposed to be the culmination of everything I had worked for. The day I would finally stand up, surrounded by the people who supported me, and say, "I did it." The weeks leading up to graduation were a blur. I barely had time to think. The Millers were excited, planning a small celebration at their house afterward. Even Ryan, who usually shrugged off anything sentimental, seemed genuinely happy for me. I still remember the morning of graduation like it was yesterday. My mind kept racing with thoughts about everything it had taken to get here, from the moment my parents left me on the Millers' porch to all the nights I stayed up studying just to prove to myself I could do it. I thought about all of it. Mrs. Miller had ironed my graduation gown the night before, leaving it hanging on my bedroom door with a little note that read, "So proud of you, Adam." I smiled when I saw it. It wasn't just the note, it was everything they had done for me over the last 5 years. They weren't just foster parents anymore. They were my real family. The ceremony itself was exactly what you'd expect. When they called my name, I crossed the stage to grab my diploma, and for a brief moment, it felt like time stopped. The crowd was cheering, and I could hear the Millers and Ryan shouting my name like I was a rock star. It was everything I had hoped for. But of course, nothing in my life stays perfect for long. After the ceremony, we gathered outside to take pictures. The Millers were beaming, and Ryan was making dumb jokes about how my diploma was probably written in crayon. Emma had even shown up, which was a surprise, since she usually kept her distance. It felt like my world was exactly how it was supposed to be. Until I saw them. Standing at the edge of the crowd were Greg and Laura. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I hadn't seen them in years, and I definitely hadn't invited them. But there they were, dressed like they had just stepped off a cruise ship, scanning the crowd like they were searching for something, or someone. I tried to ignore them, hoping they would leave once they realized I wasn't going to acknowledge them. But Greg spotted me. And before I could turn away, he started walking toward me, dragging Laura behind him. My chest tightened as they approached, their faces stretched into fake smiles. "Adam," Laura said, her voice way too cheerful for someone who had abandoned her child. "You look so grown up." Greg patted me on the shoulder like we were old friends catching up. "We're so proud of you, son. This is a big day for all of us. All of us." The audacity of that statement made me laugh. I stared at them, not sure whether I wanted to scream, cry, or just walk away. The Millers and Ryan were standing a few feet away, clearly confused but unwilling to intervene just yet. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "We came to celebrate with you," Greg said, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "We've made mistakes, Adam. But we always wanted what's best for you." Then Laura chimed in, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We've missed you so much. We thought this would be the perfect time to reconnect, as a family." I said, "You don't have the right to call yourselves my family." I said, "You abandoned me. You left me with strangers and didn't even bother to check if I was okay. And now you want to show up like none of that ever happened?" Laura's smile faltered, and Greg's face turned red. "That's not fair, Adam," Greg said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We did what we thought was best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" I snapped. "You mean best for you? Don't stand here and act like you did this for me. You were living your dream life while I was trying to figure out how to survive without you." By this point, people were starting to notice. The Millers approached, their faces a mix of concern and anger. Emma surprised me the most. She walked straight over to Greg and Laura and said, "You don't have the right to ruin this for him. You've already done enough." It was the first time I had ever seen her stand up to them, and I couldn't have been prouder. Greg tried to argue, but Laura pulled on his arm, whispering something about causing a scene. They both looked at me one last time, their faces a mess of frustration and pity, but before they could walk away, the Millers quickly stepped in, wrapping me in a hug and reminding me that today was about my achievements, not their drama. Ryan handed me a tissue, mumbling something about how I should charge them for emotional damages, which actually made me laugh. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We went back to the Millers' house, where they had decorated the backyard with streamers and balloons, and for a few hours, I allowed myself to forget about Greg and Laura and just enjoy being surrounded by the people who actually mattered. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat out on the porch with Emma. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't see it before, but you were right. We were manipulated. They only ever cared about themselves." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. We sat there in silence for a while. I felt like Emma and I were finally on the same page, and that was enough. That day wasn't just about graduation. It was about finally standing up for myself and cutting ties with the people who had tried to drag me down. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. But I knew my parents weren't done with me yet. Their sudden reappearance in my life, the way they insisted on coming back after all these years, it gave me a feeling that something wasn't right. And I couldn't have been more correct. A week after graduation, I received an email from Laura. At first, I thought it might be an apology, though deep down, I knew it wouldn't be. It was long, filled with half-truths and excuses. She wrote about how hard things had been for them, how they had made mistakes, but that they had always had my best interests at heart. Then came the kicker. We hope we can move past this and reconnect as a family. You're doing so well, and we're so proud of you. Maybe you could help us out during this difficult time. Help them. After everything they had done, or more accurately, hadn't done, they had the nerve to ask me for help. It was laughable in a way that wasn't funny at all. I didn't reply. I deleted the email and blocked her address. But the anger lingered like an unwanted guest. Emma had been keeping an eye on them, more out of curiosity than anything. She kept me updated on their latest stunts. They had drained their savings trying to maintain the illusion of their so-called dream life, and the travel blog had flopped, leaving them with nothing but debt and bad credit. They had sold most of their belongings and were now couch-hopping with distant relatives who, according to Emma, were starting to lose patience with them. They're a mess, Emma said one night during a call. But they're still blaming you for everything. They think that if you just forgive them, everything would magically fix itself. Forgive them? I snapped, the bitterness sharp in my voice. Forgive them for leaving me homeless at 12 years old. Emma sighed. I'm not saying they're right, Adam. I'm just telling you what they're saying. Their downfall wasn't something I celebrated, but I also couldn't say I felt bad for them. They made their choices. And now they were living with the consequences. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward. One afternoon, I got a notification on my phone that left me speechless. Greg and Laura had found me on LinkedIn. They had left a comment on a post I'd made about my upcoming scholarship. We're so proud of you, Adam. Let's catch up soon. It was nearly identical to the comment they had left on my graduation post. I didn't even know they knew how LinkedIn worked. I blocked them immediately, but it wasn't enough. They started messaging people in my network, coworkers, professors, even the Millers. The messages were all the same, a mix of guilt-tripping and blatant lies about how I had abandoned them. One of the messages reached my manager at the bookstore, who pulled me aside one day to ask what was going on. Look, I don't want to pry, she said, but someone claiming to be your parents sent us an email. It was weird. I was mortified. I'm so sorry, I said. They're really not part of my life. I'll handle it. To her credit, my boss didn't push for details. She just nodded and said, well, if they bother us again, let me know. We've got your back. Hearing that was a relief, but it also made me realize just how far Greg and Laura were willing to go. It wasn't enough for them to invade my personal life, they were trying to sabotage my professional one too. Emma stepped in at this point, posting a public statement on her social media accounts denouncing them. She didn't hold back, detailing how they had abandoned both of us and refused to take responsibility for their actions. While Adam and I have worked hard to rebuild our lives without their support, she wrote, we owe them nothing. Her post went viral, with hundreds of people commenting in support. While it was validating to see so many strangers take our side, it also escalated things. Greg and Laura began lashing out, posting their own dramatic tirades about how ungrateful we were and how much they had sacrificed for us. Their posts were full of half-truths and outright lies, but the more they talked, the more people saw through them. Then Emma called me, her voice unusually animated. Remember that old storage unit they had, she said. Turns out they stopped paying for it, and the owner let me grab some stuff before cleaning it out. An hour later, she showed up at my place with a beat-up cardboard box. You need to see this, she said, dropping it on the table. Inside, I found a folder full of papers, unpaid bills, foreclosure notices, and letters from collection agencies. My stomach sank as I flipped through them. They were living way beyond their means, Emma said bitterly. Failed businesses, maxed out credit cards, looks like they ran instead of facing it. Near the bottom of the stack, a letter from their lawyer caught my eye. It mentioned restructuring finances and reducing liabilities to streamline expenses. My name was right there, listed as a liability. I slammed the folder shut, my hands shaking. They didn't leave because they couldn't afford me, I said quietly. They left because it was easier than cleaning up their mess. Emma was silent for a moment before saying, I thought you deserved to know. Thanks, I murmured. After she left, I sat there staring at the folder, torn between burning it and keeping it as evidence. In the end, I kept it. Not for them, for me. By the time I started college, their reputation was in shambles. People were flagging their crowdfunding campaigns as scams, and even the relatives they had been couch hopping with had kicked them out. According to Emma, they were living in their car, still clinging to the idea that I owed them something. Meanwhile, I was thriving. College was everything I had hoped it would be, and I was determined to make the most of my scholarship. I even started a small side business teaching financial literacy workshops on campus. It wasn't anything fancy, but it felt good to give back, especially knowing how much the Millers had taught me about managing money. One day during my second semester, I got a call from Emma. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her tone equal parts frustration and disbelief. "They showed up at my apartment." "What?" I asked, my chest tightening. "They were crying, Adam. Begging me to convince you to talk to them. Said they're desperate." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "What did you tell them?" "I told them to leave. I told them that if they came back, I'd call the cops." I didn't know whether to feel angry or relieved. Part of me hated that they were still trying to drag Emma into their mess. But another part of me was proud of her for standing firm. She had come a long way from the quiet girl who used to avoid conflict at all costs. I didn't owe them my forgiveness. I didn't owe them my money. I didn't owe them my time. What I did owe, I owed to myself, to keep building the life I wanted, free from their influence. But of course, Greg and Laura weren't done with me. They weren't the kind of people to give up, especially not when they thought there was something in it for them. It started with phone calls, random numbers popping up on my screen at all hours of the day. I usually ignored them, but one day I made the mistake of answering. It was my Aunt Karen, a relative I hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't waste time. "Adam, what's wrong with you?" she snapped before I could even say hello. "Excuse me?" I said, completely caught off guard. "Your parents are struggling, living in their car, and you're just ignoring them like they don't exist. They're your family, Adam. You owe them at least some kindness." I held back a laugh. "Kindness?" I said. "Did they show me kindness when they left me in foster care and never looked back? Did they show me kindness when they made me fend for myself at 12 years old?" Karen scoffed, clearly not expecting a response. "They were doing what they thought was best. People make mistakes, Adam. You're being heartless." I hung up. I wasn't going to waste my energy explaining myself to someone who clearly had no idea what I had been through, or worse, didn't care. Over the following weeks, similar calls came in from distant relatives, most of whom hadn't bothered to contact me in years. It was the same script every time. I was the ungrateful son, the selfish one who couldn't forgive his poor parents. What none of them seemed to understand was that Greg and Laura weren't just bad parents, they were toxic, manipulative, and completely unwilling to take responsibility for their actions. Helping them would only drag me back into a mess I had fought so hard to escape. When the calls didn't work, Greg and Laura took things to the next level. One day, I received an email from a lawyer representing them. The subject line alone made my stomach turn. Notice of intent to pursue financial support. I opened it, skimming through the legal jargon, which basically boiled down to this. They were suing me for financial abandonment. According to the email, they believed I was now obligated to support them, since I was successful. It was laughable. First of all, I wasn't a millionaire. Sure, I was doing well, but I was still in the early stages of my career. Second, I had been in foster care. Legally, I didn't owe them a thing. I forwarded the email to a lawyer the Millers had helped me connect with. He assured me it was an empty threat. "They don't have a case," he said. "They're trying to scare you into giving them money. Don't engage." It was good advice, but it still left a bitter taste in my mouth. The idea that they could twist the story, that they could make me look like the villain after everything they had done, felt like salt in a wound. But instead of obsessing over it, I poured my energy into my work. By now, my financial literacy workshops had grown into something much bigger. What had started as a side hustle was now a full-fledged organization helping young adults across the country learn how to manage money and build their futures. I had partnered with nonprofits, schools, and even a few major companies. Every success felt like one more step away from the person I had been when Greg and Laura left me behind. Recently, I got an email from a producer who had heard about my story through one of my nonprofit partners. They were working on a series about resilience, and they wanted to feature me. At first, I hesitated. Did I really want to put my story out there for the world to see? But after talking it over with the Millers and Emma, I decided to go for it. If sharing my journey could help even one foster kid feel less alone, it would be worth it. The filming process was surreal. At one point, they asked if I wanted to include anything about Greg and Laura. I thought about it for a long time before deciding to mention them briefly, not to shame them, but to provide context for my journey. They made their choices, I said during one of the interviews. And those choices shaped me in ways I never expected. But they don't define me. My life now, the family I've built, the work I do, that's what matters. But during one of the filming breaks, the producer pulled me aside, looking hesitant. "Hey, Adam," she began, "we found something during our research. It's about your parents. Are you okay hearing it?" I raised an eyebrow. At this point, I wasn't sure anything could surprise me. "Go ahead," I said. She took a deep breath before continuing. Turns out they were evicted after defaulting on several loans. There's also a history of unpaid bills. And here's where it gets complicated, potential fraud allegations. Looks like they skipped town to avoid legal trouble. I stared at her. Fraud allegations. The words felt heavy, like they were sinking in slow motion. She nodded. "It's not major, at least not on the surface. But there's a pattern: failed businesses, suspicious credit card activity, and attempts to secure loans they had no way of repaying. They left a lot of people hanging." The anger I thought I had buried flared up again. So it wasn't just that they were selfish, they were actively scamming people. And they ran when it caught up with them. The producer gave me a sympathetic look. "I thought you should know, in case it comes up later." I nodded, even though my head was spinning. Their lies had always felt personal, like they were just about me. But knowing they had left a trail of destruction behind them made it even worse. Every single thing about them confirmed what I had always suspected. They hadn't left because they couldn't afford to keep me. They had left because I was inconvenient. An easy way to cut their losses and start over. When the documentary aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages came pouring in from people who had grown up in similar situations, thanking me for sharing my story. Some said it gave them hope. Others just said it made them feel seen. It was humbling, in a way I wasn't prepared for. Greg and Laura, predictably, tried to use the documentary to their advantage. They went on social media, posting long, dramatic rants about how I had portrayed them as villains, and how they were the real victims. It didn't work. If anything, it backfired. People who had watched the documentary started calling them out, pointing out the holes in their stories and questioning their motives. Their attempts to regain sympathy only solidified their reputation as manipulative and selfish. Meanwhile, I bought my first home, a cozy place in a quiet neighborhood where I finally felt like I belonged. I invited the Millers and Emma over for a housewarming dinner, and we spent the night laughing, overeating, and reminiscing about how far we'd all come. Emma was thriving too. She had graduated college and was starting her own career, free from the shadow of Greg and Laura. Honestly, I don't regret the decisions I made. Cutting ties with Greg and Laura wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My success came from the Millers, from Emma, and from the family I built, not from blood, but from the people who showed up. And that's all that matters. At the end of the day, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, and who helps you become the best version of yourself. And the family I chose was everything I could have ever hoped for.